Dune Part 2 is a follow-up to Denis Villeneuve's 2021 movie Dune, and this movie takes place immediately after that one ends, like pretty much like right away. Once that movie ends, this one really starts, so you could watch them back to back. Now, as a little background, I never watched the first one when it came out in theaters. I watched it sometime later on streaming service because of the good word of mouth surrounding it. But up to that point, I wanted to describe myself as a fan of the Dune franchise or anything like that, because it wasn't until recently that I watched the 1984 David Lynch movie, and I thought that one was kind of mediocre, but it is what it is, and I've never read any of the books or anything like that. But after watching the first one and then watching it several more times since then, I really enjoyed it, and I was looking forward to this movie, but I was kind of disappointed when it got delayed back in November until now. But I will say the wait was well worth it, because when I saw this in IMAX theaters last night, I really was not disappointed in it whatsoever. First and foremost, this movie just looks fantastic. I think the budget was around $190 million, and I can definitely understand why they spent so much money on this movie. Compare that to a lot of other modern movies that'll spend a couple $100 million because they had to do a lot of costly reshoots. But with this movie, it doesn't look like they had to do any of that, because all the effects seem to fit really well together. Now, there were certain situations where they would use CGI effects in the movie, but it never felt to me like they were doing that because they were trying to avoid shooting something practically, or they were just trying to take the easy way out by saying like, okay, let's just do it in post or something like that. To me, whenever there would be CGI effects, it seemed like it was always done in a situation where you just couldn't show something in real life, so you would obviously have to handle it with the computer. But even then, when they did do that, it didn't distract you from looking like a cheap cartoon or anything like that, or below average green screen or something that you're seeing in a lot of more expensive movies these days. Anytime there was computer effects involved with this movie, it really did look good. And as far as the cinematography, it just looked fantastic. A lot of people have pointed out with Denis Villeneuve's movies and things like that, that it looks kind of barren and almost sterile, but I think it really works because I like the kind of minimalist approach, because as you're watching it, you're not getting distracted, or there's not just so much clutter on the screen where it's hard to digest what's going on. You can actually see everything pretty clearly. Even in the action scenes where there's a lot going on, everything is very legible, so you can just sit back and enjoy the movie without having to search the screen for what you're actually supposed to be looking at. All the actors gave a decent performance throughout the movie. However, I would say Christopher Walken and Florence Pugh had really limited screen time throughout the movie, so it was a little bit harder to gauge them, but I think they were serviceable for what little we did see of their characters. Another great addition to this series is Austin Butler as Fade Rotha. The dude is so captivating just because of the fact that he's so psychotic. I do kind of wish that they made him a little bit more cunning than he was, but I think it was so interesting just to see his character and how the movie was kind of setting him up as the dark evil yin to Paul Atreides' yang. Speaking of Paul Atreides, Timothée Chalamet knocked it out of the park with this one. In the first movie, he kind of starts off as a skinny kid, a bit nerdy. I mean, obviously he had some fight training because he was the son of a duke, so he had to train in that at a young age. But he really was someone who was just kind of running scared with his mom and unborn sister. In this movie, he starts off kind of at the tail end of that, but as the movie progresses, he transitions from a scared kid running for his life to the messianic figure who's in charge of a group of warrior nomads, as he's hell-bent on seeking revenge on the people who actually wronged him and his family. This is the type of character growth we should have seen for Anakin in the prequel trilogy for Star Wars, but Denis Villeneuve and Timothée Chalamet were able to pull this off in just this one movie. Another part about Paul's character arc that I found interesting was the elements that you can't change your future even if you want to. We saw a little bit of that in the first Dune movie where he prophesied Duncan's death, but he wasn't able to change it even though he was there when Duncan died. In this movie, the Fremen have a prophecy that a messianic figure will lead them in a holy war against the galaxy, and Paul kind of understands that he could take on the role of this character, even though he doesn't necessarily believe he is this character, but he understands he needs the Fremen's help in order to seek revenge against the Harkonnen. But as the movie progresses, he becomes more exposed to the spice of Arrakis, which makes his visions of the future become more clear. And as that happens, he starts understanding like, well, maybe I could be this figure in their prophecy, until he starts actually believing he is this figure, but he rejects it because he doesn't like the future that it would hold, until he just understands that, like, you know what, this is set and there's nothing that he can do to change it. So he just embraces that dark side of him. Because from what I understand about the Dune franchise, mind you, having not read it or anything, it's essentially the origin story of a ruthless galaxy spanning conqueror. And that's the fascinating part about it, because you can see it from the perspective of said conqueror, and you can kind of empathize with him as he's a young man running for his life with his pregnant mother against traitors, and as the choices that he makes from that point on that lead him to the path of destruction that he ultimately walks down. If I was to have some complaint about this movie, though, it was that the Harkonnen seemed less threatening in this movie than they were in the previous one. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's inconsistent with the writing, because in the previous one, they were able to take out the Atreides all in one night, but that was also because they were able to blindside them with a sneak attack, and the Atreides had a traitor in their midst. But in this movie, even though Paul Atreides and his mom are on the run, it felt like the Harkonnen were on the defense the whole time, and they also came across as a kind of cowardly. The only one who seemed to be somewhat menacing was Fade, but even then it wasn't necessarily because he was particularly cunning or anything like that. But I think he should have been more of a tactical genius who could compete with Paul on an intellectual level. I also don't like the stereotypical thing about how the bad guys kill their subordinates because they're angry at them, or because someone is just right there and they wanted to kill someone for some reason. That happened several times in this movie, and each time I'm just kind of rolling my eyes about it, because it definitely is a stereotypical thing to see in movies. And I was just kind of like, I get it. They're bad guys. We don't just need to see them randomly kill people just for the sake of it. It's not interesting. It's just kind of boring. And I also didn't really buy how they were trying to set up Fade to be some type of great fighter. Maybe he was, but it really didn't come across that on screen, because when he's introduced to the audience, he's, yeah, fighting a few people 1 against 3, but at the same time, most of them are just kind of drugged and they can't really fight back. So it just seemed kind of boring. So towards the end of the movie, when he has his big duel, I just didn't really feel like he was much of a threat, because the only time we've actually seen him fight in the past, it really wasn't that big of a deal. And when it comes to the violence in this movie, it really did come across like they were trying to tone it down in order to keep a PG-13 rating. There was a lot of brutal deaths in this movie, but it would happen like just off camera or something like that. And I can tell if they wanted to, they can make it a real bloody mess. But instead, they decided to tone it down. And I think that was a disservice for it, because just imagine Game of Thrones, but they were trying to make it PG-13. It would feel like it's missing something. And I kind of felt like it was missing something with this movie too. And another thing I was kind of thinking about throughout this movie, when Paul Atreides first rides one of the Sandworms, you can see the effort that he has to go to just to get on board it. But then after that happens later on in the movie, we see groups of Fremen riding on top of a Sandworm. One person would be kind of like piloting it while everyone else is just kind of on their back. And I was wondering, did all of them have to basically jump on in the same way? Like, once you get one person on it, do they kind of like make it stop and then everyone piles on? They never really addressed that. I'm really wondering how Lady Jessica was able to get on top of one of the Sandworms in order for them to travel south. But it seems like the filmmakers might have thought about this too. Like, how are we going to show everyone else getting on top of the Sandworm? They couldn't figure out it. So they're like, oh, let's just not show it and then hope people just don't think about it. But it was something that I thought about. Is it really needed in the movie? Do they need to show them it? Well, I'd kind of like to see how that works. But I mean, it's not taken away from anything. I just thought something that stood out to me. Overall, though, I don't think those things hurt the quality of this movie. I just think they could have enhanced it a little bit, but I still really enjoyed watching it, and that's why I'm giving this one an 8 out of 10. But let me know what you think about this movie in the comment section below. And also, if you have read the book and you watch this movie, what did you think about it? Because I'm curious to hear what people who are fans of the book have to say about this one. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest in entertainment news or see some more of my reviews. And if you can too, could you like the video and share it, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.